Session Development through Partnerships. I'm Keri Williams from the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, and I'm going to do double duty today. I'm going to welcome you here to this session, and then I'm going to be a panelist. So I want a couple of things to remind you at the start here. Please silence your cell phones so that we can have an uninterrupted discussion here today. And if you would do us all a great favor and go to our website and evaluate the session when we're done here today, that really helps us kind of figure out what we're doing in the future and what people really want to hear about. Part of my duties is to introduce the speakers, but I'm going to let Grace do that because she's our moderator today. I think that's all I'm supposed to do. So without further ado, we'll kick it off. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Keri. Okay, so we're live streaming this event, so we will be looking around and at the camera. I'm just going to start with a quick framing, and then we're actually going to do self-introductions. How's that for passing the responsibility? So you are in a session called Advancing Equitable Development Partnerships. And the reason that we're here today is that we are in a inflection point as a society. With reinforced commitment to collaborate with communities to identify housing strategies that strive to address persistent inequities and to work beyond the current model of doing business. We're here today because state agencies, affordable housing developers, communities, funders, philanthropy, and private partners are exploring strategies for promoting development by and for communities to address those needs of those who are most impacted by housing disparities. The Housing Development Consortium session, this session here today, shares strategies from leaders on the front lines of advancing change for equity, community development partnerships, and increasing access to affordable housing. So each one of these fine people up here is actively engaged in projects that involve partnerships with a CBO, a community-based organization, to advance ideals of equitable development. And if we took the time to have each of them describe the project that they're working on, or the projects, in some cases, many projects, we would take more than the hour that we have. So what we've done is put together a handout. And if I can get Daniel to advance the slide for me, there's a QR code that will be on the screen. Please go ahead and shoot a picture of that. And you can also shoot a picture of us and put it on your social media while you're at it. But this link will take you to a handout. I wish I do have my camera. I love seeing all the you actively doing this. There's a handout that has a number of projects that each of these folks are actively working on or just completing. So you can learn about the great projects that are happening and why they've been asked to join us today. So with that, I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. I'll start to kind of give an example. My name is Grace Kim. I'm an architect and founder of Schemata Workshop. And I'm also serving on the board of the Housing Development Consortium. And I've asked everyone to also answer the question, why does equitable development matter? And so for me, it's important because we are seeing the incredible disparities, housing disparities based on race. Communities of color have long been left out of the conversation and have had things happen to them versus being in charge or having agency to lead and provide direction. So it's time that happens. And Schemata Workshop, my architecture firm, is very much committed to supporting communities as they go about that process. So I'll have, I'm going to go in this order: Derrick, Chris Persons, and Muammar. And I'm saying those names so that you can all grab a mic.
Good afternoon, everybody. Derrick, Belgarde, Executive Director of the Chief Seattle Club. Why I feel this is very important is if we're ever going to address the racial disparities in housing insecurity, it's going to take a very strong and tenfold equitable approach to development.
I'm Chris Persons. I'm the Director of Communities Housing. Derrick's on my board. And we're doing a project with Muammar and Africatown Plaza. So, my board is absolutely, I don't have to reiterate the history of white supremacist, racist activities that really is at, the foundation of our industry, the housing industry. And my board, my organization is committed to confronting that, owning it, and working towards, reversing it.
And I'm Muammar Hermanstyne with Africatown Community Land Trust. Equity is important to the conversation because equity is a constantly shifting paradigm. And I think when you're working with partners, you figure out how to move with those shifting sands and the way that things are constantly changing so that you can be more proactive and less reactive to circumstances as they come up. So equity is important because we're constantly, consistently redefining what it means.
Thank you. We're going to have Joel and then Keri and Ceil.
Hi, everyone. Joel Ng with Edge Developers, and we're a Seattle-based development firm. The three partners, and why this is important for us is myself and two other partners are all Seattle natives. We grew up in South Seattle, went to Seattle Public Schools. We're multi-generational Seattleites, and we've seen the changes firsthand. And so we formed the company to address some of these issues. And I think many of the issues and many of the projects we're working on span beyond affordable housing and some other community CBOs, BIPOC. So our company and what we see personally is very important to us.
Keri Williams with the Commission. As I mentioned, I'm in the Multifamily Housing and Community Facilities Division in a job that we created called Community Outreach Lead. I'm here because I think policy can be a lever to kind of push equity in the direction that it needs to go. And that's what we're trying to do at the Commission.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ceil Erickson with Seattle Foundation. Happy to be on this panel of housing experts because I probably know the least, but Equitable, the commitment of Seattle Foundation to racial and economic equity is what is driving all our work, and the belief that, yes, race is the biggest indicator of outcomes. So that just really drives the work we're doing in community, with community, and recognizing that the people closest to the challenges are also the people closest to the solutions. So really looking to engage community in those solutions.
Great, thank you. So before we dive into questions, and just to give you a sense of the format, we've got some questions that we've come up with before. I'll ask the folks. We're not going to go one by one and everybody answer, but we'll have some moderated discussion. If you have a question, I'm going to ask you to jot it down, and I'm looking for a volunteer who might be willing to grab the questions because I don't see the Kayla. Thank you. So Kayla is going to take the questions. If you want to jot them down, just kind of wave at her to get her attention so that she can grab it from you. And then I'm going to have her just review them all and see if there's any kind of questions, and then she'll hand them to me. And maybe also, Kayla, if you can keep an eye on the social media app and see if there's any coming in from that. Thank you. Great. So I've lost my place. Before we dive into questions, I'm going to ask a couple of the panelists to help frame the conversation a little bit more. We had Keri and Ceil, Keri from Washington State Housing Finance Commission, or WSFC, and Ceil from Seattle Foundation. They're both funders of affordable housing projects, and their organizations play a very important role in this process, not just from a functional lending standpoint, but also for establishing and redefining the policy frameworks. So I'll start with Keri. If you can start us off by sharing some of the challenges that WSFC had or made in their policy around your 4% tax credit allocations, and what prompted your organization to consider these changes.
Well, first of all, we always call it the Commission. Oh, sorry.
The rest of us call it WSFC.
The story of how we got here is very long and would take an hour-long session. But suffice it to say that the 4% program has always been sort of the production program at the Commission, and it hasn't always been competitive. It's until maybe 5 years ago, it's pretty much been anyone who can use this program can come and take the tax credits and the bond cap. When it started becoming competitive, the process of allocating the funds did have kind of a scoring process with points, but they weren't very well thought through because it hadn't been really necessary before. And as competition ramped up and we became more and more oversubscribed, it became clear that we needed to ground the policy more in what we wanted in terms of outcomes and what our values were. And that became really important when we had a commission meeting where those values and outcomes were challenged, and where the commission was kind of called out as not valuing racial equity and not paying attention to the outcomes on behalf of communities of color and developers of color, frankly. And so at that point, we kind of went back to the drawing board and we created a policy that put racial equity and community engagement, community-based organizations and community voice at the very top, above cost of development and above other considerations that had been important in the past. So, spending a year writing that portion of the policy, it took a lot of overtime and it took a lot of input. We talked to BIPOC developers, we talked to community-based organizations, we talked to advocates and organizers, and we talked to other HFAs who were on a similar journey across the country. There are a few that are pushing the envelope as are we, and came up with the policy that we have today, which allocates gives a possible 26 points to organizations that are BIPOC or partnering with BIPOC organizations that are community-based and have deep roots in the community, and organizations that conduct a robust community engagement process as part of the development process. And so the results after the first round, we've only done one round of this, are clear. We had 9 out of 10 of the allocated projects were either developed by a community-based organization or in partnership with one. We had 4 organizations that received all 8 points for being a sole sponsor BIPOC organization as a developer, and we had 3 more that received partial points for partnering. We did this fast. And because it was fast, the process wasn't as inclusive or as thorough as it should have been and could have been, but we decided to harness the momentum that we had and get it done quickly. And then, it's an iterative process. So we'll be going back and tweaking and fixing and hopefully making the policy better.
Great, thanks. And Ceil, you're with the Seattle Foundation, who has a long history of supporting affordable housing nonprofits. And currently you have 2 important initiatives that reinforce the focus on racial and economic equity. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about the lens that you're looking at and reviewing and selecting awardees?
Great. So these are actually more initiatives that we're involved in, not a traditional grant making program, even though, again, over the years, we've had a responsive grant making program, and more recently have narrowed and focused on racial and economic equity at the system and policy change level. But it's not just the 2 initiatives that the foundation's involved in. They're housed at the foundation and they're in partnership with many, many people, both of them. But the first one is now I have to look at my notes because I've just panicked. Evergreen Impact Housing Fund. So this is, again, it's in partnership with many other people's money that has come to the table, and the Seattle Foundation is definitely housing the funds, working in strong partnership with the commission, as well as JP Morgan Chase. Microsoft is a big investor in the fund. There's 5 credit unions, and again, these are it's a social impact investment fund, and is delivering last dollar funding to affordable housing projects. So again, the focus is on affordable housing for working families in King County. So there's 4 projects that have been underway, but this is just a way that private dollars are able to hopefully leverage and scale public dollars. And yeah, we're continuing to fundraise and raise more money to have this influence in the community. And the other project is through Civic Commons, which again is under the umbrella of Seattle Foundation. They have a Black Home Initiative project, and again, looking to increase home ownership for Black individuals and families. This is actually Seattle, South Seattle. The Civic Commons is focused on Seattle, South King County, and actually North Pierce County. And there's 6 other cities that are also doing this work. So there'll be hopefully, again, great learnings, data that can inform the success of this work. And Civic Commons, again, they're helping to build all those partnerships of how you get the land, how you find the developer, how you make loans so that Black homeowners can purchase. So it's a lot of different players that they're trying to coordinate and wrangle and move in the right direction to increase Black home ownership.
Great. Okay, so a couple of things, since so many people came in after we started, the QR code up there has a link for the 2 programs or initiatives that Ceil just mentioned, as well as a number of projects that have that all of the folks up here are working on. So please take a snapshot of that and grab those or get the access to that handout. So I'm going to start with the moderated questions. Oh, and then Kayla, who's standing up there, if you have a question and want to jot it down, please get her attention. She'll come over and get the question from you so that when we get to the portion we're taking audience questions, that we can get to them. So first moderated question is, when I hear the terms culturally appropriate development or culturally led housing, I know I have my own expectations and thoughts about what that means. And I think that that is very different for BIPOC organizations than it is for white-led organizations. So I'm going to ask, as a person of color, I'm going to ask Derrick, Muammar, and Joel. So if you can jockey the microphones around. As a person of color working in the affordable housing sector, can you share what those 2 terms mean to you?
Yeah, what culturally appropriate, culturally led housing means to us in the Native community. Well, first I'll just talk about, so in the past, they're in urban centers, we know that there's been other attempts at addressing the Native disparity by nonprofits, housing authorities developing or creating housing targeting the Native community. And they've always failed miserably when they don't involve the Native community, any BIPOC community or other specialized communities that way. Obviously, we all know that. What it takes for to really address the Native community, because the 500 years of historical trauma, genocide, stolen lands, all those things, bad policy that forced to integrate us in the broader community and actually keep us out, has led us into a very heightened level of distrust of non-Indigenous systems, non-Native systems. It really takes a very strong culturally appropriate way and a culturally appropriate approach to address our community. You have to understand the trauma, you have to understand the marginalization, and be there to lead the way. Our community isn't going to actually just accept housing. Housing is more than 4 walls and a roof, right? I think we can all agree on that. It takes really a familiar face to understand that shared traumatic experience that we have in our community. That's what I'll just say.
Defer to Joel, but here's the big deal. When you say culturally appropriate housing, what you're referring to is the whole system, right? From beginning to end, your architects will be culturally appropriate to that development, your general contractors. It should speak to the community in terms of all of those different pieces, because part of this and part of the story, and Derrick's told part of the story, is not just reaching out to the community and being able to engage in the community and make sure that they understand that the kind of housing you're creating is housing for them, but also understanding that the entire system can benefit them, and here's how. So, you know, you can get jobs with a general contractor, you can work with the architects, you know, hopefully our legal team can be diverse enough. So it's looking at that entire model and making sure that the impacts, which traditionally they have not been in affordable housing, are also distilled back to the communities that they're intended to serve. Because we're more than consumers, we want to be producers, we want to be behind the scenes as well, the parties that you're going to for all of the ancillary pieces that it pertains to develop the housing. So that's part of the picture, and Derrick luckily painted the other part of the picture, which is more important, because that's the part of it that's always missing too. How do you connect with the end user?
Can I add something real quick? I just skimmed over real quick. So I wanted to touch on that too. It is every piece of it too. And from the design phase, just to give an example of our first building, we went with a non-native architect to design our building. We knew we weren't hitting right. They weren't truly understanding. So we went and talked to a native architect who didn't normally do residential, but we talked him into like taking it over for us. He took it over for us, and he looked at the plans that they had came up with, said, this is not going to work for your native, our community. And in particular, they had long corridor hallways. And our community has a heightened level of PTSD, institutionalism, right? From boarding schools to prisons to jails, all those things. It'd be very triggering for a Native community member to be in a long corridor hallway like that, trying to live, right? So it's those type of things that actually make sure that we think about in culturally appropriate services, culturally appropriate housing.
Similarly, we think there's, for me, I can summarize it in 3 areas. It's location, it's construction, and operations. I mean, those are all very basic, but we take those very seriously. So from a location standpoint, I'll focus on Seattle. For the API community, there's a historic history of where APIs could live. There was redlining in Seattle. So there's the Chinatown International District, CID. South Seattle was areas that my grandparents could only live in back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So those areas are gentrifying. So that's, as I said in the beginning, you know, we formed a company to try to stem that in some fashion. So from a location standpoint, we jump at opportunities in these areas. We continue to look in these locations. From a construction standpoint, on a large project we're working on now on North Beacon Hill, it is catering to families, mainly people of color, mainly APIs and others. And one thing that we've designed and we put in and included within the design is 3 and 4 bedrooms. 4 bedrooms are not common, especially in multifamily, maybe in townhomes and so forth. But 4 bedrooms are something that, and we did a separate presentation a year ago that we called it more than a unit count. And what we mean by that is that we do need to be culturally appropriate. And these families are typically multi-generational. So not only you think of the traditional family, and I think even in the funders applications, we think of families of parents and children. Well, in our communities, it's also grandparents. So that's why we held on to the larger bedrooms in the project we're completing and hopefully closing soon. And in that regard, the funders push back because the metrics doesn't fit. When we're asking, we have almost $90 million in public funds in this project, this large project. And so when our unit count, our total development costs, and thank you, Keri, for saying what you said, but that wasn't we didn't operate under that. We operated more on a unit count. We held firm to that. The other thing is this project is at the nexus of I-5 and I-90, and there's heavy level of pollution there. We have state statistics of heavy pollution. So we looked very hard and we considered very much the exemplary building standards, which is very few projects. It's a higher energy code, but we decided we needed to do it. It was the families deserved it because there's a very high level of pollution there. It's very real. So we have ERVs, energy recovery, ventilation. I won't go into that, but that's in every unit. We have noise pollution. It's on the flight path to I-5. So we have double pane windows. We also have low history of education. So on every floor, we have study halls for the students. So we designed it very much so to be inviting for school-age children. Lastly, just from operations standpoint, the organization that I'm partnering with, SCIPTA, Seattle Chinatown International District, PDA, they have average residents in their projects of 8-9 years, which is a very high average. And that's because they understand who they're operating. So once you build it, we need to make sure that we're not only building it right, but we make sure the services that they have access to, and it's not intentional services, but we understand our residents and that we connect them to what is appropriate. So we take that extra step. So stop there.
So thanks. So you can hear that it's really kind of a broad range of issues that are what communities of color are really thinking about when they think of culturally led housing and development. So when it comes to development for and with a community, it's really hard to imagine that any BIPOC led organization like that doesn't do affordable housing will all of a sudden wake up one day and start to develop housing. So in terms of building capacity, what the funders perceive will be feasible for a nascent CBO developer might be quite different. And this is where the systems come into place of who can do what and what have they historically done and can you demonstrate this? So I'm going to ask Chris, Joel, and Ceil if you could share what your organizations have done to build capacity while building partnerships with CBOs.
Starting with me?
Yeah.
Sure. So, when we think about capacity building, and I know Muammar has a lot of thoughts on this too. You think about like the staffing and the ability to do real estate development. Some of our community partners want to get into that, want to get into the field, like Chief Seattle Club, like SCIPTA. We're partnering with SCIPTA on an existing project that has several 4-bedroom units. We're partnering with Africatown. They also have become developers. So how can we kind of get out of the way so they can build the capacity? How can we partner with them and help them learn sort of the ropes of the industry? So we don't always have to partner with them. The other point I think it's important to make is it's not just, it's not us providing capacity for the community partners. It's really us getting out of the way and providing support so they can build their own capacity. We don't have to do that for them. And it's also us developing our own capacity as good partners and understanding how to work in community and understanding how to hear and listen. So when we're told this is what we need in a culturally appropriate way, that we're actually responding to that. And I think we're talking about challenges a little bit later, so I'll hold off on some of that.
Joel and Ceil.
Okay, so Seattle Foundation definitely, again, I think more across the sector of building capacity, the belief that, yes, if we have effective nonprofits, our community is going to be more effective. And capacity building is hard. I mean, even just listening to Chris talk, I think about, okay, you have to be really intentional about with your limited resources to prioritize capacity building when there's so many other competing priorities that are, your clients and who you're serving are looking for services. So as the organization to say, we're going to be intentional, we're going to look at our internal capacity and use resources to build that, and then to reach out and say, oh, we're going to partner with our other nonprofits. That takes, again, even more resources and time away from maybe the direct mission. It's all coordinated, but those clients that are saying, oh, we need this. So I just think it is very challenging and complex. There are not a lot of funding sources for capacity building. I think we've seen a shift of funders providing general operating support that might capture capacity, but you also have to be very intentional about that. So I think for the foundation field, there's been more and more awareness and discussion, and especially looking at BIPOC-led and serving nonprofits and knowing that they are historically most underinvested, under-resourced. So what is the work of the philanthropic sector to work differently and invest differently? So that's a lot of the conversations we have around Seattle Foundation.
You know, for the projects we work on, each client, so we develop for our own account, but we do a lot of development consulting as well. And each client obviously is different. So on the clients that are maybe doing one project at a time, I think capacity building is probably front and center of what we help, you know, from the traditional development things, because we're not going to encourage them to hire staff to do this. For instance, we're working with a food bank. They're only going to build one food bank. We're working with an Asia Pacific Cultural Center. They're only going to build one cultural center, but we're working with other nonprofit housing providers that are going to develop more. So in addition to just filling in where they may need help, I'll give an example where I think we as a company felt this was the best capacity building example we could do. And I'll just call it the North Lot, Pacific Med North Lot on North Beacon Hill, this project I'm referring to, and there's a couple people here helping us in here, so thank you, helping us get over the finish line. But that project is one that Schemata has experience building affordable housing, but they haven't been in the field for a while. So as I mentioned, we've secured almost 90 million public funds, low-income housing tax credits, city, county, state, so forth. The funders, both the private funders, the lenders and the low-income housing tax credit syndicators said to Schemata, you need Schemata another guarantor on the deal. You need another guarantor. And we knew this early on, but we felt, I mean, Schemata was chartered by the city, number one. So they're a little bit different than just a nonprofit, right? They're city chartered. And so we knew this going in, but we felt there was some, there's sometimes when you view a BIPOC organization, you view it with a certain calculus, whether intentional or unintentional, and you view it as how long have they been in operation, who's running it, what do they do? And I would argue that that's not always the case for non-BIPOC organizations. I would argue that very firmly, even if it's a new non-BIPOC organization. So with this guarantee, we knew the guarantee had to be, and this is the guarantee for the tax credits. This is the guarantee for the construction and perm loan. So there were a couple options. It came down to Community Roots. Chris was in this conversation, and Edge Developers, us. Now, mind you, the ownership is only going to be Schemata because it's a nonprofit. Frank Chop, who's a sponsor of this, said it has to be a nonprofit owner in perpetuity, and we support that 100%. Edge is a small private company. So myself and our two partners said, Edge, let's put up the guarantee. Let's put up a guarantee. Let's put up a guarantee on the project for this reason. And this isn't meant to sound anything but what it is. We did it because we had been working with Schemata for 5 years. And we want Schemata to continue and build capacity and not have to get a guarantee on their next project. If they were to bring in another nonprofit, and in my estimation, and this has nothing to do with Community Roots because they're an extremely strong supporter of Schemata and has been and will continue been, and Chris has been fighting with us at the front line on some of these things. But what I said is if Community Roots comes into this project, kind of similar to the example I gave before, if they come in, it's going to be viewed by the population as a Community Roots project, not Schemata, who's already secured this $90 million, if you're tracking what I said. And so we, Edge, are providing guarantees on the project with the goal of advancing our partner and hopefully the capacity as they continue. They have a pipeline of other projects. So that's probably the best example I could give.
Okay, and I think we'll probably touch on that a little bit more in a bit. So Keri, when we were preparing for this panel, you mentioned how capacity building can go both ways. So maybe, if maybe you could elaborate that on a little bit for the group.
Yeah, I think Chris touched on this a little bit, but so often the language of partnership between white organizations and BIPOC organizations is one of white supremacy. And it's one of gifting knowledge and expertise and experience from a white organization to a BIPOC organization or to BIPOC individuals, or this expertise and this experience that we have will increase your ability to do things. And viewing it, the power to determine what is culturally appropriate, what needs there are in the community in terms of housing, what preferences there are, that all lies within the community. And as Derrick mentioned, when you ignore that, you end up with projects that don't serve people. They don't serve the communities that we're all trying to serve. And you mentioned it in your introduction. We end up with people that things happen to, rather than people who are determining their own futures. So in a good partnership, each partner brings, if not equal amounts of experience, they each have definitely equal value to each other. So I think the language needs to be intentional about who is sharing capacity here and who is strengthening which organization, because it's not one way. And it's definitely, Chris mentioned, our job is to kind of get out of the way. But I also think the job of white organizations is to learn from the BIPOC partners they have, how to do this better, and how to diversify their staff, and how to train their staff, and how to respond to community better, how to engage with community better, so that they end up a richer and more robust organization.
Right. So instead of white-led organizations thinking that they're the saviors coming in to like bestow their knowledge, that they should really be open and receptive to what they might learn.
Exactly.
As a result. Yeah, great. Muammar, when we were talking earlier about building capacity, you brought up at the point about sort of making sure that the folks involved, all of the folks involved, not just the community-based organization, but the architects, engineers, that there was a broader community being engaged. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the societal cost if we don't build that capacity within different communities of color?
So, I mean, just to be very specific about it, what we're looking to do when we're doing these kinds of projects, or at least what I can speak to what ACLT has been trying to do, what I've done in my entire career, is to make sure that we have groups of individuals that are fully representative of the whole. I mean, when you walk down the street in society every single day, I see Black people, I see Asian people, I see Native American people. Let's make sure they're all working on the project. And when you talk about project capacity lies within the ability to have these institutional pieces, whether it be the housing institutions developing the housing, the architectural firm that's doing the architecture, that is still there a year from now, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road, which we don't have in a lot of major cities. You go into most major cities, the question people say is they have a project that's going to have, and this is very specific, they'll say, we have a project that requires a Black contractor. Well, we've got one Black contractor in the entire city, and you find the one Black guy, and then you go to him, and then you go through the list and you say, oh, we have one Asian American architectural firm in the entire city. It shouldn't be that. It's got to be a very diverse group, and it's not, even if the organization is, as I've heard up here, and we'll repeat the words of my fellow speakers, white-led organization, there has to be a certain level of diversity that can speak to the communities and the level of diversity that we have in this country, right? So it's bigger than a Black issue or a white issue. It's a matter of, can we be reflective of our current society and becoming more and more diverse, and understanding that we have to open up the conversation a little bit more to create capacity. And capacity doesn't just lie with making sure that in the example of Skipta, for example, and Joel mentioned that it's not just making sure that you can extend guarantees, but it's also to make sure that that organization can continue to do the kind of work that it's been doing, and the only way an organization or certain organizations can continue to do the work that they're doing is if there's more people coming behind them to do that work. Because what'll happen is, especially with a lot of minority community-based organizations, unfortunately, there's not another person coming after me to do the kind of work that I'm doing, right? And who is going to be the next Muammar? Who is going to be the next Joel? Who is going to be the next Derrick? Those folks have to be groomed and be out there, but then they have to come from somewhere. They have to be going through the institutions that are typically not letting them get the education level they need to get to that point, because we know what it is in this country, right? You go to college, come out, you owe $100,000, $200,000, right? So not to jump on my political soapbox on, issues that would sort of equal out the ship from that level, but it's like it does boil down to things like reparations when people talk about it. It boils down to things like recognizing that you have to allow for greater equity in terms of starting from higher education going up in order to make sure that you create those true institutional capacities. So it's very deep work and it has to start from there. Thanks.
Great. I'm looking at the list of questions and the time, and I'm like, oh, we're not even halfway through. Okay, so I'm going to do a little pivot. So folks that want to ask questions, please write them down, and we'll take them in just a minute. I'm also noting that lunch is right after the session. So if folks are up for sticking around for like another 10 or 15 minutes till noon, can I get like a thumbs up or sort of a general? Okay, I'm seeing like maybe half. Okay, so we will do our best to kind of wrap up around that time, and then we can take more questions or have more discussion for another 10 or 15. If you want to duck out, then you can do so without offending any of us. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about trying to decide the challenges versus the trust question, but we're going to go with the challenges. So what are the challenges with working with CBOs? Chris, I'm going to have you take this question.
There are none.
Okay, well, then we're gonna move on.
So there are lots of challenges in from the systemic challenges that you've heard Muammar talking about and Keri talking about a lot, and Joel as well, to just the challenges of partnership. There's this proverb that King likes to quote a lot, that if you go alone, you can go fast, but if you go together, you can go far. And I like to interpret it as, if you go alone, you can go fast, and if you go together, you can go slow. And let's see, that's my little joke. Thank you for laughing at that. But it's true, right? When you're working together, it takes longer. And when you're, to touch on the trust, when you're trying to build trust at the same time that you're just trying to build a building, it takes longer. That adds cost to the project. There's additional challenges. The reason why we have long double loaded corridors is because it's efficient, right? So as we're moving forward and doing what we have to do, culturally appropriate projects in partnership, we just have to realize that takes more time and there's some additional costs. And so our lenders and our our funders, our bankers, they have to realize that too, and they have to come along, because that cost can't all be borne by the project. The flip side to the challenge is just the award. I don't know if the picture of Liberty, can you put the picture of Liberty Bank building back up there? I mean, when a group comes together and they're collaborating, and sometimes there's friction, and when we really do listen to each other and collaborate, then we can create some really fantastic projects like Liberty Bank building, which captures the history of the Central District in Seattle. It captures the history of the first African-American owned and operated bank in Seattle. And it captures sort of the modern element of African-American art. And we have 3 small African-American businesses on the ground floor and really put a stake in the ground of the central district and say, we're not going to be displaced from here anymore. And that's the value of these kinds of partnerships.
Great. I'm going to keep it real by asking Derrick and then Muammar to respond to that question. What are the challenges in working with white-led organizations?
Yeah, can't say that, Chris. No, I think it's a lack of openness and honesty. I think when not in a bad, like egregious way, but like if you're going to make it work, a partnership with a white-led organization, you have to actually start addressing some things and come clean and come honest. And there's always going to be tension. And I think people don't like that awkwardness, that discomfort when you start talking about, uncomfortable things. So a lot of times people avoid it. But if you're going to be in a partnership like it, you got to really get to the meat of it and actually be able to hash those things out. I'm on the board of Community Roots, so like I can it wasn't always just, in the Chris, it wasn't smooth sailing. There was a lot of things we had to overcome right there. And right now we're working with Bellwether Chief Seattle Club, wonderful organization. We've had a couple retreats now, and that's really where we've gotten into it, where we've had some uncomfortable discussions, and the things we're not seeing eye to eye, whether it was about budget money or the long corridor, like those type of cultural appropriate things, and what's important, what are both sides musts and wants on a project are totally different. Totally, they're not aligned well, and it's being able to come and talk about those things and working through it and becoming uncomfortable.
So when I think of this, what I think of is, unfortunately, I read this article over the weekend between Forterra and I forget the tribe, that Suquamish tribe that's having an issue. And I think of that and I think to myself, some part of that is, it boils down to what Derrick just said, honesty. Another part of that is, how are you translating things that you speak to every single day to that organization? Is it clear? Is it in a way that they understand what is being done, and it's not being done in a way that appears to be very opaque, and very disingenuous and dishonest, right? It has to come across genuine, it has to be sincere, and it has to be an easily communicated idea. So when I think of these relationships, I do think honesty is important, but honesty comes from good, transparent, clear, firm, just great communication across the board between both parties.
I have to say, I can't take out of my mind the visual that came up when you just gave that example of, like, if you think about how we got our lands, basically we told the native people, come with us and sign this treaty and everything will be great. And basically we stole land from the people that were on this property, because there was apparent understanding of what everyone thought they were getting into. And clearly there was not that shared understanding. They each had their own idea of what was happening. And clearly it was to the advantage of the white colonizers. So anyway, sorry for that little editorial. Why don't we take a couple of questions, and then I've got some other ones that we can come back to if we need to. Thanks. Kayla's just volunteered herself so that she wouldn't be voluntold. She's our marketing coordinator. Do you want to come up? Yeah.
So this is it's not directly addressed to anyone, so I guess anyone can answer. Can you talk more about the guarantee issue and how to address it? Guarantee requirements serve as a significant barrier for BIPOC developers. What strategies can be used to increase BIPOC developer participation on projects?
Sorry, I'll start by saying that in our partnerships, we put up the guarantees, and so that's a risk that we take, and there are other development consultants that consult with organizations that don't put up the guarantees, but that's part of the partnership. We share ownership. What is a guarantee? Well, there are several types of guarantees: completion guarantees, financing guarantees. So there's risk attached to all of those, and and all of the partners would bear some responsibility. If the ownership is 60-40, then those guarantees would be split 60-40. But if the small organization can't do 100% of the guarantees, then it's all going to come out of us. So that's a risk. But Joel was talking about this earlier, and we experienced it too in our partnership with Schemata, where the investors and lenders wanted us to support all of the guarantees and wanted us to write into our the development agreement ways that we could come in and basically assume control of the project, because they didn't fully trust the minority led organization. And I've said to my panelist colleagues up here, if that had been a white-led organization we were partnering with, I'm not sure that the bank would have had and the investors would have had that same approach. So, what we have to do is continue to put pressure on the systems and the bankers and that whole industry so that they will trust minority-led organizations and support them without having a white-led organization in the mix.
But I'll try to be brief. So on the guarantee portion, it is an issue. It is an issue because it's liquidity. The underwriters, the credit review process is in, I'm just going to say New York, Chicago, big places where they don't see, they kind of see certain things. There's the relationship banker, whomever. But one way to get around it, I guess earlier is, and we've used this with other clients, is to start putting up the developer fee. So there's a certain amount of liquidity. And so if it doesn't make sense, raise your hand, because maybe it's heady, but there's developer fee that's on every project. And oftentimes we have gone in when the investor or the funder say, okay, we believe the experience of this BIPOC organization is okay, but the liquidity is falling short. So their first line of defense is, if there's enough back-ended developer fee, then we'll put that up and use that as part of the guarantee. The problem with that, though, is that I think there's an inherent issue with that, because who wants to work for free? Who wants to put up that risk of your developer fee? That's not the point. But the point is, we're working within this, the matrix that we have to work in right now. The other thing, and I've talked to the commission about this, is actually Lisa has talking to us about it, is how can the commission help with these guarantees and items? And I think that's fantastic, because that is something new and different, that is not all on the shoulders of a new organization.
I'll just speak to it from this perspective. When you're going into a closing, there are a couple of guarantees that are important, right? Or you have contacted your final investor in a LIHTC deal, low-income housing tax credit deal. There's a couple of guarantees. Biggest one is your completion guarantee, AKA, can you finish that project? Right? So the usual trust factor says, no, we don't believe you, MBE organization, can complete that project because you don't have the experience and the track record. So can you get someone who does have the experience and the track record? And so then in order for us to do that, we have to go to someone like, let's say, a CRH, et cetera. But in the case of Schemata, there is demonstrated capacity there. So, and that's part of the capacity conversation, I will say. The second biggest one is long-term guarantees. If today, tomorrow, because we're all bleeding hearts on our side of the fence, that we decide to give everyone free rent, because that's what I'd like to do, right? The other part of that guarantee says that if the loan is defaulted on, or if something happens with the financials, we want someone who's got a bigger set of pockets that we can climb into and get those monies back from. And that would honestly, in most cases, be someone like CRH, where, we can say, let's dive into your portfolio, have you liquidate a few things and pay us back. Or can you right the ship? Right. So those are the things that, and I'd like to break it down in simple terms, that the bank is usually looking for, or any investment group is looking for, when it comes down the line to talking to a BIPOC organization. Can you do it? And all of those things is what it falls under.
Okay. Next question. Our communities have been increasingly displaced. Many BIPOC folks have been pushed to suburban cities. How is your work reaching them or looking towards regional expansion?
I'll take one part of that. And one part of that, what I will say about that is I've never been a firm believer in concentrating all of my low-income housing into just the urban core. I also believe that we have to follow the full intent of what HUD has indicated is the intent of what they want to do in terms of displacement of poverty. Dispersing poverty means that you need to have affordable housing in wealthier communities as well. All the NIMBYism has to go away. So, when people are getting displaced to these outer suburbs, let's think more regional. Let's think more, why isn't there more affordable housing in, let's say, a Bellevue? Or I would name it something a little more fancy, but again, it goes to that. And that's the real reason why, when everyone's saying there's displacement, there is displacement. That's very true. But you cannot, part of what's driving that is everyone needs to be honest about the conversation, and you cannot concentrate poverty in one place, because then you have problems that multiply, and then you have the urban problem afterwards. And then you have gentrification. Then we repeat the cycles over and over again.
One of the things that we struggled with in the policy to begin with was you're telling us to go out and engage with the community. Who's the community and who are we engaging with? Because if you're talking about the community in which we want to locate these projects that live all around those projects, they're very engaged and they let their opinions be known often and at council meetings, and they're shouting, and there's lots of NIMBYism. And so we encouraged in discussions around the policy, the community can be identity based rather than geography based. And that would include folks who have been displaced from a community and desire to come back. They can be folks who have been displaced from a community and desire to kind of reform that community in a new place, reaching sort of in a broad way to define who the community is that you are engaging with to plan this project, and forming a relationship and a partnership with a community-based organization that represents that community and speaks for that community, can help mitigate those the harmful effects of gentrification and can help build community in new places.
Just as far as taking regional, so Native Americans since about the 1950s, about 53, 54 in particular, there's a government act, the Relocation Act, to start taking Tyson natives off of reservations and promise them prosperity, jobs, housing, everything in these urban centers throughout the country. All it was a poverty trap. To this day, what leads to a lot of our urban indigenous homelessness. Right now, about 75 to 80%, they say Native Americans live off of reservations in urban centers. So we have this problem in our urban areas, like in Seattle, where 15% of the homelessness rate at 1% of the population. And those gross disparities are probably similar across all the major cities across the country. In Seattle, Chief Seattle Club, we're not the only one who identified this and started working to address this. There's great things happening in Minneapolis, in Albuquerque, and Phoenix. And but I think that's pretty much it. So anyways, one of the things that we're talking about as an organization, how we can actually document and actually build a model that we can actually take to some of these other urban centers, because it's a problem all across the country.
Muammar touched on building capacity and a pipeline of future affordable housing industry leaders and some barriers to entry, i.e. student loan debt. What about compensation? The salaries and benefits for those who work in affordable housing is significantly less than other industries.
That is true. At some point, you have to be the, as I call it, PRT, right? Poor righteous teacher. You're going to keep on trucking on and not getting paid. But the reality is, we all have families, we all have responsibilities. Real life comes up, right? And at some point, that's where the person behind me comes into play, because at some point, very true, I can't keep doing this for peanuts anymore, right? But the other part of this is, can we create institutions that are strong enough to support what I really need to get paid, what I should be getting paid, and what I'm really worth? And can we start paying each other what we're worth? not what we think we're worth. And I'd be interested in, honestly, if we're going to be honest about the conversation, in seeing, is there true wage parity across the board in all of the nonprofits, or, you know, any sort of even public facing institutions between, you know, Blacks, white, Asian, male, female? Like, what are the income parities out there, and what's causing income disparities between parties? Because are we assuming someone's more skilled because they've been in an organization longer? So it's a very complicated question to unravel. And I think we need to unravel it. And the way we need to unravel it is by looking at those various factors and asking ourselves what's really equal, and how do we create it, so make the model such that people can actually get what they're worth and stay with these organizations.
And I would say that goes for your architects too. I don't know how many times I have developers saying, well, these other architects don't ask for that. And it's like, no, actually, I know those other architects. I know they're asking for that. So are you asking me this because I'm a woman in a minority led firm? So just, yeah, I'll pay forward all across the board. Chris, what are you going to say? Something?
I want to say that, you know, the flip side to that, in an organization, you know, larger established affordable housing development companies, if you're a director of real estate or a project manager, you actually you'll be in the six figures in terms of salary. So it's not bad, and it's a great place to get involved and grow. And you know, Muammar, you can come back and work at Community Roots Housing, and we'll pay you. We'll never be able to pay you what you're worth, but we'll get close.
Okay, we're going to take another question. Where did he go? Oh, here.
Hi, I'm relatively new to the world of housing, but I've been doing fundraising and communications for more than a decade at different nonprofit organizations. And what you're describing today in terms of the funding and the kind of relationships that banks have with us is infuriating, and also just, it sounds very much like what we normally have to do in the world of general nonprofits in terms of asking, you know, we're being asked to prove that we can do this work and that we're worth it, and that we don't have to have somebody else vouch for our ability to know our communities, to serve them. And so I was just thinking about Vu's conversation, or, you know, piece from earlier this week, and talking about these nonprofit Hunger Games, and now we have to prove that, you know, you're asking us to do things and jump through hoops that you wouldn't ask of another organization. And so as I hear you sharing that the banks are asking for these things, I know that we have some banker attendees in the crowd. And so I'm curious, I mean, I'm assuming that we as a group are kind of saying these things to them, right? And like that we're asking them, like, you wouldn't be doing this if it was somebody else that looked different at this table right now. What are they saying to defend their actions, or what are they saying is a barrier to them changing their behavior? Because there's a whole other thing around funders in the general nonprofit world for why they maintain their white supremacy culture and their old ways of thinking. So what are the banks and other investors saying for why they have to keep doing things the way they do?
Here.
I can start. So the one project that I had alluded to earlier, they said, you know, the relationship person said, you know, if it were me, I'd approve you guys today. I do it all day. I know, you know, and so we take that as, you know, and I've known this relationship person for some time. I actually respect this person for their knowledge, but I also take that comment as, you know, I could say some other, for people of color, you're not like the others, or, you know, things like that, you know, and I didn't take it so much like that. So I want to be very clear about that, but that was a comment. And then the reason coming back was, well, but, you know, these people aren't, you know, the underwriting criteria, they just check their boxes and say, have you worked with this organization recently? Do they check all the boxes? And so they can hide behind certain criteria, but I can tell you that it's not treated the same. And I know it's not treated the same between BIPOC organizations and non.
Yes, I've heard several different things. One, The investment committee will not allow that. And when you look back at it, it's like, what are the requirements of the investment committee? Well, when we're going through our underwriting process, we just came back and said that, your income is way too low. It can range from a wide range of things in terms of what is the rationale, and they all sound very plausible. But I also know that, with the amount of non-BIPOC developers who are even for-profit developers, who's providing those guarantees? Who's starting those individuals up? Who's starting those companies up? Why are those companies more well-resourced? So we got to start asking those questions and seeing, can we get more of these models that are not more of the same? And we have to consciously create that air of change that is going to allow for that, because that's what the banks are asking, right? Because they don't see a lot of it. So it's not the norm. Let's create the norm. Right.
You could save that. Okay. So we are near time, and I'm going to be respectful of your time. We could go on for a lot longer. So I'm going to ask everyone to do sort of a final statement. If you can keep it like a few sentences, if possible. What's the one thing that you would like to share with the audience that you haven't had a chance to share about equitable development partnerships? And maybe we'll start out at the far end and just work your way this way. Sorry, Keri.
Thought I was going to have like all this
You thought
time.
you were going to go that way.
Fair. I think the thing that I would like to emphasize, that I think we've heard in a lot of different ways, is that white people have to give up something. White people have to give up the power. White people have to give up some of the money. This is, the bottom line is that the pie is limited. And until we have the resources that we need, which are, on a scale that we can't even imagine at this point, we need $50 billion in Washington to make this problem go away, and we're not going to get it. So until there is, just abundance in this space, in order to have equity, we need for white organizations to step up. Community Roots is a good example, and say, yeah, we're willing to do those guarantees without the control, or, we have to play in this system, as Joel was saying, and we need for those organizations not just to say we believe in equity and we really think this, we need a diverse staff, and we need to acknowledge that this is a world full of people that have not had their fair share. We need those organizations to actually take steps that actually reduce their amount of power in this space.
Just touch on a few things is the point about not being paid enough, maybe not being recognized and so forth. I think our field generally draws a certain type of person. If you go back to when you were in college or high school, would you really imagine where you would be right here in this affordable housing field? I think a few of us would be, but most of us probably wouldn't be. So, but I think the thread amongst this, and I'll say it, and I see this very much in the BIPOC organizations, is their commitment to the mission, their commitment to doing what is right for their organization really outweighs whether it's pay, which I'm not saying pay is not important, because very much so. We want to draw more intelligent people. We deserve to draw intelligent people that are committed. But I'm energized every day with the partners we work with for their commitment for doing this. And it's a certain type of person. I think there's armchair people, but there are people there. It's really the unsung people that are just doing it every day. And I just, that's what keeps me going. I mean, our work is not easy. We know that, but that's what I'll say.
Well, as a privileged white woman working at a foundation, I've been there 26 years. So I have seen, in my little bubble, I have seen change, and there's so much more change to make. But again, even listening to everybody speak on this panel, there are those partnerships, the collaboration, the trust. And I think as a community overall, that we just need to keep reinforcing those pieces of how we're going to make change in our community together.
Yeah, so I just want to say this time last year, Chief Seattle Club, we had 0 units of housing. In a few short months, we were going to have about 240 permanent units between about 3 buildings. So we have a need for like an asset manager. And when we talk about equity, it's like what Muammar was talking about was like, you have to have it across every aspect and every pocket, right? But how are we going to find a Native American asset manager in the city of Seattle? I doubt it. It's very unlikely. What we find in a lot of our leadership in those type of new roles that we find ourselves venturing in, we have to do a lot of homegrown type of thing, right? That we have to actually invest heavily and nurture people up to actually add more professionals to the broader stock of things. And we're okay with that. But with this asset management, you don't want to take chances, right? We really need an asset manager. So if you know one who wants to come in, and here's our plan, is actually, we do have somebody on a lower level, asset manager level, right? But we need a very seasoned person to come in and train and actually develop a Native American who could become a future kick butt asset manager. And Chris is right about wages. It's about 6 figures. So if you know anybody, maybe somebody from your team.
Don't be. But I wasn't thinking, we should talk. I don't know if I have that much more to add at this point, except it's incumbent upon white-led organizations to, do what we have to do. And our industry is still predominantly white-led organizations. And, it can be kind of thankless work, but we have to do it, right? The 500 years of racism and stealing of lands, we're not gonna right that ship overnight, and it's not our BIPOC partners that have to right that ship. It's up to us. And as Keri was saying, we have to give up power, or we don't have tons of money, so we have to give up power. We have to give up leadership. We have to stand down so our partners can lead.
And I'll just say, just closing 2 things. One, abundance. We have to have an abundance mindset. When we say there's not enough resources to go around, then there will not be enough resources to go around. But if we say there are enough resources to go around, then there are enough resources to go around, period, point blank. Now, I always stand on that 100%. Pragmatic, thoughts aside. Second thing is, when we talk about capacity, let's be clear. When most of my colleagues who probably started out in the industry the same time that I did, started out and got their jobs that were probably of a different racial type than myself, got into certain positions, I remember them having conversations with people hiring them and saying, oh, well, we like Bob. He can grow into the role. He can grow into the role. So understand that when you're finding someone, you want to find someone who's a BIPOC person or individual who potentially might be probably your next asset manager. Understand that person will grow into the role. Grace didn't start off as a principal of her own firm, but she grew into that role. Okay. And we just have to be clear on that and understand that we're going to have lots of capable, talented individuals or people of color who are out there in the workforce who are doing this kind of work, and we have to let them grow into the role.
Great, thanks. So this is the challenge of going with last of this group. Yeah, hold on for a quick second. So there's a lot of, oh yeah, I was going to say that. I was going to say that. So just to kind of round things out, white-led organizations need to give up something. And as an individual, as organizations, and if you want a quick snapshot of what that could look like, Dr. Bettina Love is a great speaker, educator, and she did a very short, she did a long interview, but there's a short 6-minute segment that you can watch on CNN. So if you Google Dr. Bettina Love, co-conspirators, it's about what it means to give up power, what it means to give agency to somebody else. It could mean giving up something for yourself. And it could be a little thing or it could be a big thing, but white people have lots and lots of social capital that they have every day. You can spend it every day and you can still go back to the ATM, social capital ATM, and replenish it every single day, because that's what you have in spades as a white person. So know that the rest of us who maybe show up, in certain circles and at certain seats, seems like we have that capital, but we might have limited amounts. And there's no way that I can, give up all my social capital in one meeting. And what I have might be far less than what somebody else has. And so don't expect the person of color to stand up and be the one to sort of, put all of their social capital on the table. If you're sitting there in the room and you're uncomfortable with the conversation or where things are going, don't be just uncomfortable with it. Say something, because that's the social capital you can spend and not be damaged or harmed by. And that's where the rest of us all of us as a society will benefit. So with that, please give a warm applause to this group.
Can I just remind you all, please, to evaluate this session? You can go to the Housing Washington website, and there's an easy way to do that.
Good job, Grace.